On December 14, 2023, British Army Lieutenant General Andrew Harrison, Deputy Commander of the United Nations Command, passed the torch of leadership to Canadian Lieutenant General Derek McCulley in a change of command ceremony performed at the U.S. Forces Korea headquarters on Camp Humphreys, Republic of Korea. General Harrison's story is a long one, beginning back in the 1980s when he first commissioned as a second lieutenant in the British Army. After the ceremony, we were afforded an opportunity to sit down with General Harrison and hear his fascinating and incredible recollections from both decades past as well as his recent tenure as the Deputy Commander of the United Nations Command. All right, well, thank you so much for meeting with us, General Harrison. From my understanding, you commissioned as a second lieutenant in March of 1987. And then on September 1st of 1989, you joined the Paros, right?
That's right, yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about those early days and what they were like?
Yeah, so I was at university, studying at university, and I had always known from the very days when I saw the Falklands War on television that I wanted to join the parachute regiment. So I worked pretty hard to try and get through that hurdle and achieved it eventually, and therefore, you know, one of the happiest days of my life when I passed the interesting selection for the parachute regiment and was commissioned into the regiment.
What is that training like? Is it similar to airborne nowadays, or was it a little bit different?
Yeah, it's very similar to what it is now. We have to, once you pass the commissioning course at the Royal Military Academy, which takes a year, part of that is selecting your sort of mental and leadership aptitude. But after you've completed that, then you're taken away, a group of you, to do a series of really sort of tough physical tests that lasts for weeks and weeks and weeks, that is called P Company. And P Company, once you pass that, you are given your red beret, and that enables you then to go on for parachute selection, parachute training afterwards. So for all of us in the parachute regiment, P Company is a big deal, and it's a tough old test.
When did you instruct at Sandhurst, and what was the teaching experience like?
Yeah, I went back to the academy to teach about 7 years after I'd left, and it was a fascinating time. I did a year instructing all 3 terms, so juniors, intermediates, and then the senior term at the academy. And then the college commander asked me if I would be his adjutant. So as a parachute regiment officer, I'm used to being in the field, I'm used to running around with a large pack on my back, but I wasn't used to riding a horse on a parade square and having to ride up steps and doing some of the famous things that the adjutant of Old College has to do. So it was unusual, very interesting, and actually is probably more nerve-wracking than many of the times I've been under fire.
At what point did you get involved with the UN, and how did you begin your time there?
Yeah, interesting. So I was working in main building in London, in the sort of the headquarters of defence, and I knew I was going on to staff college, and I knew I'd have another couple of years in driving a desk. And my friend was responsible for posting all of the interesting UN jobs around the world. So I went to see him, and I said, "Look, anything interesting coming up?" And he said, "Oh yeah, Sierra Leone's good, and something, you know, that looks interesting." And so I worked hard to get myself posted to the United Nations in Sierra Leone, and sure enough, it was pretty interesting.
I would imagine. And I wanted to ask you about Sierra Leone. How did you land in the role of an unarmed military observer for the UN there?
Yeah, the war had just finished, so there was a war between the Revolutionary United Front, a rebel organization, and the government of Sierra Leone. So there was an accord, a peace accord that was signed between the rebels and the government. And my job as United Nations unarmed observer was to go in and sort out the modalities, the arrangements for de-armament, the decommissioning of weapons, and the reintegration of those rebels. And so I was working on that for a few months in one of the most challenging parts of the country, deep in the jungle in West Africa, working and living with the rebels when, unbeknownst to me, the civil war reignited, and I was caught up in the maelstrom that was that civil war.
So when the Civil War began, what were the immediate dangers to yourselves that you and the other observers recognized right away?
Well, we didn't know, because we were so deep in the jungle, and comms were so challenging, communications were so challenging. We didn't know it had reignited. So I went to one of the routine meetings that I had as the deputy team leader with the rebel chain of command, and I was totally unaware that this war had restarted and there was fighting going on in other parts of the country. So we went to that meeting, and it was during that meeting that we were kidnapped and subsequently held hostage. So it was a surprise and a shock to the system, and yeah.
So you guys found out in the worst possible way, but they kind of found out at the exact same time. Is that right?
Yeah, they were ahead of us. They were ahead of us probably by about 12 hours. And so when we went to the meeting, I was there to negotiate about the peace accord, which we'd been doing routinely for a couple of months. But they invited us to that meeting with the specific intention of taking us hostage. And they came armed. They swarmed over us. They beat us up. They, bound us, and they dragged us into the jungle. And that's how it all started.
How did you escape your capture from the RUF, and what were those 12 days like?
Yeah, they were awful. I mean, they were really difficult. It's difficult to envisage it at the time because you don't know what the outcome is going to be. But I was initially held in solitary confinement. Then a Russian friend of mine was put in the cell with me. People around us were being killed. We were treated pretty horrifically. The rebels held me as a UK officer responsible for all the ills of colonialization over hundreds of years. The Russian got very badly treated and beaten up because of the impact of the AK rifle and the hind gunships that the government had used against the rebels. And on 3 occasions we were taken off to be executed. And it was just a horrific time. We were very badly beaten. We were very badly treated. We had no food for 12 days. And Andre, the Russian, and myself and a Pakistani officer, Rafiq, took the opportunity to escape one night. And we climbed off the roof of a building where we were being kept captive. And we managed to escape, ran through the jungle, spent the night traversing the jungle. Even though 2 of us were injured, we managed to get into a compound of Indian soldiers that were armed but were surrounded by rebels. So we had to break into that compound through the rebel lines, which was pretty challenging. And alert the Indian soldiers without getting shot by, if you like, our own UN troops. But they were armed soldiers then. So once we were with them, we were armed, and at least we could defend ourselves. And we then had 3 months of being attacked by the rebels from the outside, but we held them off, and that's how it lasted for 3 months until a special forces operation that rescued us in a remarkable and very brave action that sadly cost the life of one of the operators.
In your escape, you weren't just unarmed. You had no equipment or navigational gear of any sort.
No.
How did you manage to get through the jungle and find this base?
I was reasonably familiar with the landscape because I'd been operating around that region, and I knew roughly where the Indian compound would be. I didn't know what state they would be in, and I didn't know whether they'd been overrun by the rebels. So as we worked through the night, it was super challenging and lots of uncertainty. But because of the way we had been treated and the atrocities that had been committed against people with us, um, any risk was worth it in comparison to being left where we were. So I'm happy that we made the right decision, but of course the outcome turned out to be good. So it's easy with hindsight.
You told me once you were in Calhoun, it sounds like you were involved in what essentially turned into a 10-week siege. What was your role in defending against the assault and the eventual extraction by the SAS teams?
Yeah, I mean, initially the place we were staying with the Indians was simply a cutting in the jungle that the Indians were defending. But as time went on, we started digging trenches, building communication trenches, cutting down the trees to build overhead protection. The sentries became more effective. We started building sort of Rambo-like traps in the jungle to stop the rebels attacking. And whilst people were wounded and were on the base, we were thank goodness never overrun. So and we were simply defending a small base that became stronger every day as the defenses improved.
How did the SAS get communications to you to let you know that they were coming?
Yeah. Well, I can't confirm it was the SAS, but it was an operation to rescue us. And in a quite remarkable operation, they were the people who we would subsequently deal with. They started negotiating with the rebel group, and we were running out of food by this time, 8-10 weeks into it, so there was no rice left. And so the organization said that they would give the rebels a vehicle if the rebels would then drive that vehicle to where we were and give us the food that was in the vehicle. So that was the plan. But the rebels acting irrationally or in a malevolent way, they drove the vehicle to the edge of our enclave so we could see it, and then proceeded to destroy all the food in front of us in the psychological games that were going on. We were starving, so we waited till 2 nights later, and then a small patrol of 4 Indian soldiers went to try and scavenge any food that they could in the middle of the night. And they brought back a small box which had my call sign on it, Oscar India 2. And in that call sign, the forces that were supporting us had smuggled a sat phone and a number of other bits and pieces. And so that sat phone was given to me, or the box was given to me the next morning, which then enabled me to communicate back to the Special Forces headquarters.
And it was a mix of operators, right? It was Nigerian forces and some others that came to rescue.
Yeah, there were a combination of multinational forces, like any United Nations mission. Yeah.
How did that experience prepare you for your current role as the Deputy Commander of the United Nations Command?
I think that experience was the clearest example in my life where the unexpected happened. I had no idea that the Civil War was going to re-erupt. We were well trained in the context of UK forces, but we were operating independently. And I think from that moment on, I absolutely understood that things can go wrong very quickly, and the worst case scenario can happen. And that was what I learned, and I've always taken that as a lesson. My regimental motto is ready for anything, and actually, in the military, you have to be ready for anything and everything. And I think that lesson I learned in a hard way on that tour.
I can't even imagine what returning from an experience like that must have been like. But in 2002, you were appointed a member of the Order of the British Empire for your actions in Sierra Leone, right?
Yeah.
What does being a member of the Order entail?
Well, I mean, it's a huge honor, and you know, for me, it was a recognition of both the suffering and the pain and the worry that my family had been through, and it was testament to those brave men and women who were part of the operation to rescue me. So I was delighted for my family, most of all, but also for the other people who were involved in the operation, many of whom were recognised for gallantry in that operation.
Were you afforded an opportunity to meet the Queen when you were inducted?
I have had the opportunity to meet the Queen, and the Queen presented the medal to me at Buckingham Palace. So yeah, it was a very special moment for my wife, my children, and myself. Yeah.
That's amazing. Was it after all of that you completed your master's degree in defense administration?
Yep, it was very short, very short, from the sublime to the ridiculous. Yeah, I went from the jungles of Sierra Leone to the classrooms of Cranfield University to get my MBA. Yeah.
What goes into earning that degree?
It was a year of master's degree study looking at the higher level management of defence. Quite a lot of, I was an economist by background, so there's quite a lot of economics in it, a lot of marketing, advertising, and skills that I would find useful later in my life. So I thought it was thoroughly enjoyable.
It was then in 2003 when you gained command of a rifle company during the invasion of Iraq, right?
That's right, yeah.
Was that your first command?
I'd commanded a platoon and a larger platoon before, but that was my first sub-unit command, so about 100 soldiers working under the MEF, under the US Marine Corps, as we drove through, we drove north through, we started in Kuwait and worked through southern Iraq.
Tell me about the challenges and experiences in the time between taking up that command and then returning to Iraq in 2006 as the Chief of Staff for the 20th Armored Brigade.
Yeah, it was, I mean, the warfighting element, that you know, the invasion or the liberation of Iraq was full-on warfighting, and working within an American MEF unit was a privilege and an honor, and actually I was grateful for the awesome firepower that my US friends brought to the fighting. So in many ways, it was the movement north. We didn't suffer much resistance, and the liberation of Basra happened quite quickly, and we were working the GOSPs in the oil fields around. So we had a number of company and battalion attacks, and actually, in comparison to what happened later, when the sort of the insurrection started and we started to get resistance from the Shia militias, that became much more dangerous. And tragically, I was involved in the incident where 6 military policemen were killed in Mujra Kabir, a small and very difficult and dangerous town in southern Iraq. So that was worse. And then when I went back, by the time I went back to Iraq, maybe a year or two later, for a 6-month tour as the brigade chief of staff, then that insurrection and the fighting by the insurgents was fully underway, and there was a lot of explosively formed projectiles, EFPs, that were raking through our vehicles and killing a number of our troops. So they were very difficult days in Iraq in the early days, and that was a seriously challenging tour, a lot of rocket attacks as well. So it is what we do, but it was difficult.
A year passes from then, and you find yourself in charge of organizing the repatriation of the bodies of British service members from Iraq and Afghanistan. How did you get into organizing that, and was it something that you actively pursued overseeing?
Yeah, no, it absolutely wasn't. And when I was given the job to be in charge of the organisation of army repatriations, it came as a complete surprise to me. And I didn't really understand why I'd been selected for that job and what the responsibilities were. It was all new. And I hadn't applied for that job. I subsequently found out I think it would be what you Americans would describe as a by name request for me to do that. And it was pretty harrowing. I mean, I had 119 bodies came back through in 69 different ceremonies over 14 months. And I was responsible for the liaison with the family, with the casualty visiting officer. I was responsible for the coordination of these often mass casualty events afterwards, all the last post ceremonies, all the dealings with the coroners, the inquests, all of that. And it was a very steep learning curve, hugely emotional. You know, every week it was meeting lovely families whose sons or daughters had been killed in the most tragic circumstances in the days before, and I was you know, face to face with them a number of days and evenings each week. So it was very, very moving. It was a massive honor to be able to do that, and anyone and everyone would help me in order to make sure that we did the best for our fallen and their families. And it was an incredible year and a half, and I learned a lot. But sadly, I you know, had lots of very harrowing conversations over that period.
I can't even imagine overseeing all of that. It sounds like it might have been even more challenging than being there.
In many ways it was, and of course there's nothing you can do to, apart from demonstrate the professionalism and the honor that we must bestow upon our fallen who made the ultimate sacrifice. That was the first time they were being brought home to their grieving families. It was always immensely charged, always immensely moving, and very difficult, but nothing in comparison to what those poor families had to go through.
After that, you were appointed to the command of the 2nd Battalion of the Parachute Regiment in 2009, correct?
That's right, yeah.
And if I'm not mistaken, you had already been in Helmand in Afghanistan when you finished your 2007 tour?
Yeah, that's right. It's my second tour of Afghanistan.
What were you and your regiment doing in the Helmand province when you returned in 2010? And were you working with coalition forces at the time?
Yeah. So I was working in an area called Nari Siraj in the south. It had just been recaptured off the Taliban. There were, you know, every day there was fighting going on there. We had 450 people deployed forward in my battle group, and over that 6 months, over 100 of those were wounded and 13 killed. So it was a very kinetic, very dangerous tour. We were being attacked, from IEDs that were a constant threat, constantly being initiated. We were, you know, under direct and indirect fire routinely, and you know, that amazing battle group, 2nd Battalion, the Parachute Regiment, and those attached to it fought with incredible valor under the most difficult and kinetic context one could imagine. And I saw bravery that was unimaginable during that tour, and it was just an unbelievable privilege to lead those young men and women.
So yes, I had heard that Helmand was one of the most volatile provinces in Afghanistan at the time, and you were wounded during your time there. Can you tell me about your personal experiences in Helmand?
Yeah. I mean, I was one of my soldiers had been killed. I went to the repatriation of him from Bastion Hospital to be flown back to the UK. Ironically, from the other end of the pipeline where I'd worked on repatriations beforehand, and I think he was maybe the 6th or 7th soldier I'd lost in those couple of months. And I was moving back from that repatriation back to my small patrol base PB2 in Nari Siraj when the electronic countermeasures of the lead vehicle went down. So we just simply swapped, and because I had ECM coverage, I took over the front vehicle. I had a set of thermal sights in my command vehicle, and I identified some people on the track in front of me, maybe 100 meters in front. We were moving almost silently in the depths of the night. I couldn't, and we wouldn't engage them because we hadn't identified them as insurgents at that stage, and they could have been Afghan National Security Forces. So I dismounted the vehicle and went forward at speed to identify who they were. And once they saw or heard me, they immediately turned and ran with their weapons. I followed them at speed, and behind me, my troops were following up. And we went into an area of compounds. And as I turned down an alleyway, there was a hail of fire came and met me, and we had a brief exchange of fire. And in that exchange of fire, I was hit in the chest. My body armor. I was running forward, and the plate was smashed into my stomach, and I assumed I'd been shot, and went down. I subsequently found out it was actually an RPG that had hit me from under 20 meters, and an RPG arms at 20 meters. So I was just super lucky that it was so close, because it hadn't fully armed, and therefore it just disintegrated as it hit my body armor and injured me in the face and the legs. But actually the main charge didn't initiate, and that saved my life. And very bravely, my troops were rapidly upon me and dragged me out from under fire, and whisked me away to the hospital. So I was a lucky guy that day. Yeah.
When you jumped out, were your troops aware that you were going to get out of the vehicle?
I told my 50 cal operator over my right shoulder to cover me. But what I didn't realize that I had thermal imaging on my sight. He had an image intensifier, which wasn't as good. So he couldn't see the insurgents that I had clearly seen. So he didn't really understand what was going on. It was an error on my behalf, and and I've consistently been ribbed for leaving my protected mobility in order to launch some rather cavalier single-handed assault. Anyway, when I was on the operating table, I learned the error of my ways. So.
Well, I heard your body armor has a place of honor at home.
Yeah. My body armor is a constant reminder every time I go to the loo, because it's in the toilet. I look at my body armor and think I'm a lucky lad.
So I want to skip ahead a bit here, and ask about your time as the Deputy Commander of the United Nations Command here in the Republic of Korea. What is your time here in that position?
I mean, what an amazing place to work. Every day is different. There are constant frictions, constant tensions, provocations. There's always stuff happening which is always dangerous and difficult. And again, there are a lot of ROC soldiers, a lot of UN soldiers, a lot of US soldiers, sailors and airmen and women who are out there every day keeping the Republic of Korea safe. And what a privilege to work with them.
What was it like holding the position of Colonel Commandant of the Paras at the same time?
Yeah, it was juggling two really important jobs, and I didn't see it at the time as a great thing to be able to do. But the difference was 12 hours of difference of time, so I could work during the day predominantly on UNC issues, and then at night I would be dealing quite often on issues relating to the parachute regiment. So, they were both an honour for me to be able to do. So, whilst it was hard work, I was very happy to do both.
Have you slept in the last 3 years?
Oh, don't worry. I will squeeze a few hours sleep in anywhere. I'm not shy of getting my head down.
Now that the colors have been passed, what are you feeling, and what will you go on to do now?
Well, I've been on the road for 9 years, working for predominantly coalitions around the world. Last 6 years with under American four-star leadership. So whilst all of those jobs have been really enjoyable, demanding, and challenging, I think I'm happy to go home. And after 9 years, to go back to gorgeous Carolyn and my three girls I'm just very pleased to be going home for Christmas.
Tell me a little bit about the people that you got to work with while you were here. You work a lot with the Katusas and the junior enlisted, correct?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we have Katusas in our team. I didn't really understand much about Katusas when I first arrived, but you know, what a great bunch of very young men who bring an extra dimension to the headquarters, because we are not yet fully integrated with the ROC in the United Nations Command. I think that'll come in the near future. But actually, so the Katutas give us a very interesting cultural perspective that helps to educate us on things Korean, and therefore, you know, that relationship is great. And of course, there are 17 nations that are member states of the United Nations Command. So it is a fully multinational headquarters, and you know, you're constantly working with Colombians or Kiwis or Aussies or, you know, Frenchmen. There's a real mix, and so there is this sort of cultural melange that makes life super interesting here in Humphreys.
Definitely. Earlier, I did a small deep dive on your Twitter account, and I found some old photos I was hoping you could reminisce about. Would you be up for that?
Of course.
All right. So the first one I've got here is, I believe, at the Seoul Defense Dialogue. What is the Seoul Defense Dialogue?
So the Seoul Defense Dialogue is a meeting that is organised up in Seoul, not surprisingly, where defence issues are considered, and we get keynote speakers to come and talk about those issues. There's a series of questions, and really it's an opportunity to inform people about contemporary military and defence issues in front of the media and in front of interested parties, academic think tanks, etc. So it's really an opportunity to explore issues with an international audience.
The next one here is, I believe, a thank you dinner for the Katusas. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Where was this at?
Yeah, that's at my house. So I was very lucky to have a decent-sized dining room table, and I loved entertaining. I loved bringing ROC generals, American generals, whoever around to my house. We would always have a laugh. We would always build very strong relationships. And that photo is a group of young Katusas who I think found it quite awe-inspiring to sit around gossiping with a general, and we had a great time. And it was my way of thanking them for what they did.
Now, this is the UNCMAC Advisory Group and NNSC Workshop. I don't know what those acronyms are.
Okay, so UNCMAC is the UNC Military Armistice Commission. So they're responsible for the sort of detailed management and oversight of the armistice. And the Neutral Nations Supervisory Commission, the NNSC, they effectively audit what we do and make sure that it is appropriate. So they're watching us, and if something is questionable or there's an investigation or something, it turns up in the media, it looks inappropriate, then NNSC come in and do the investigation. So they need to understand how we operate. And so on that occasion, it was UNCMAC, the United Nations headquarters, and the NNSC really moving around the demilitarized zone, talking to one another about why things occurred, and cross briefing on UNC issues.
Essentially being observers for
Correct.
Everything in the armistice.
Yeah,
that's very interesting. This last one, this is the Dutch ambassador to Korea, is that right?
That is the Dutch ambassador. Yeah, it was one of the countries that contributes troops and staff to the headquarters. I've always had a close relationship with Holland because I'm Parachute Regiment, and of course Market Garden, the Battle of Arnhem is a famous battle honour. So I got on particularly well with the Dutch ambassador. We had a great time, and this was at the East Coast Exchange, so another academic forum where we discussed issues predominantly relating to North Korea, and she was a good friend.
General, I can't thank you enough for your time. Is there anything you want to add?
No, that was great. Pleasure to be here. Thank you for putting this on. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
And I learned there in Edinburgh a speech ascribed to a great military leader from history. And his speech goes, "From this day to the ending of the world, we in it shall be remembered. We few, we happy few, we band of brothers. For he today that sheds his blood with me shall be my brother. So to you, my band of brothers, from the 17 nations that have been prepared to shed blood, whether male or female, whatever specialization or service you come from, it's been my unmitigated honor to stand on your flank. Because of your efforts, your courage, your sense of duty, the line has held. And in perpetuity, it will hold.